It's absolutely wonderful to have you all here on this Friday the 13th. I'm Dina Fidas. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Managing Director and Chief Programs and Partnerships Officer here at Untitled. And I'm joined by my extraordinary colleague, Rebecca York, who is our Manager of Learning and Development. And so let me first begin with the title of this session. That song is already 10 years old. If you're like me, and at least in my case, I have 2 teen stepkids. And so when we're in the car and I think I'm impressing them by being up on Top 40 radio, it turns out that, Rihanna and the, Black Eyed Peas and a whole bunch of other top 40 hits that I thought were current are actually about a decade old. And so, jokes aside, that registers every once in a while, this passage of time. But on a more serious note, I also was quite frankly gobsmacked by the passage of time. And what happened was, I was giving a learning session for the Out and Equal staff. And I was talking about events, passages of laws, milestones in the LGBTQ movement that were personally deeply affected me in my life. And as I was going through this timeline, I had an image of Matthew Shepard on the screen. And I had completely taken for granted that, like me, everyone else on this Zoom, and I could see all of my colleagues, we're a small but mighty team. I'd really taken for granted that like me, everybody else sort of stops in their tracks when they see Matthew Shepard, that perhaps like me, they have a distinct memory of the news of his brutal killing, that like me, they've met and benefited from the extraordinary activism of Dennis and Judy Shepard. Like me, they remembered the Melissa Etheridge song Scarecrow about Matthew Shepard. That like me, they had a deep visceral sense in my formative years that being LGBTQ could absolutely, being openly LGBTQ, I should say, could absolutely be a dangerous decision. And what I found in scanning those little boxes was not a complete lack of recognition of Matthew Shepard, but absolutely not the same sense of visceral connectedness that I had. And there are only about 100 of us on now, so I feel so comfortable, and I know many of you. I'm going to be really candid with you. I had a wave of emotion around that I couldn't immediately put my finger on, that I couldn't immediately explain. It was a little bit of anger or indignation, like, what do you mean you're not personally affected by Matthew Shepard? And it really stuck with me. And as happens when I have an emotional reaction, the data part of my brain kicks in. It just takes about 10 minutes. And the data part of my brain kicked in. And I further scanned the boxes on that Zoom or reflected on it afterwards. And I realized that I was looking with, pleading eyes at colleagues who were 3 years old when Matthew Shepard was killed, who hadn't been born yet, who were 5 or 10 years old when that happened. And marrying this sort of lighthearted, that song is already 10 years old, I wanted to do something really constructive with the reaction I had, because I knew I wasn't the only one. Now, thankfully, our incredible partners at Bank of America have actually invested in some really incredible and exciting generational work that my colleague Rebecca York and the L&D team are leading. So I told Rebecca about this experience. They were on the call with me, and Rebecca's quick to note, well, of course I knew who Matthew Shepard was, but I was much younger at the time. And so we put our heads together and we came up with this live exercise, and now it's been translated into a toolkit. We're looking at other maybe mass participation exercises that riff on this. But let me, and if I may ask Rebecca, you to go to that next slide. What that moment I had on that Zoom related to Matthew Shepard speaks to is the importance of common ground, and common ground when it comes to history, when it comes to our personal life experiences, and when it comes to our knowledge of events and people that have shaped us in some way. And absolutely, research shows that cultural knowledge and these experiences, including even collective trauma, and arguably that wave of very visible hate crimes, and certainly the wave we have seen in the last few years of very visible, particularly anti-transgender hate crimes, there's collective trauma, and then there's also an opportunity for collective bonding in those moments. As an example, I, of course, remember exactly where I was on 9/11. I was here in Washington, D.C. My cell phone stopped working. People were evacuating. In a study, 93% of those 30 and older say that they remember exactly where they were on September 11th. And despite all that had happened that day, how horrifying it was, about 2/3 of people couldn't stop watching the news. And so, for example, every 9/11 anniversary, it's quite common for people to reflect on exactly where they were, to talk about what it meant to see, the hosts of late night television crying, Jon Stewart on The Daily Show crying that week. Many of us, millions of us, quite literally had shared collective trauma and a shared experience and a deep level of bonding and recognition of the significance of 9/11 and the fact that there was now a pre-9/11 United States and a post-9/11 United States. And certainly that applies in many ways globally, in part because of the actions the US government took afterwards. But going back now to the LGBTQ story here, as we reconcile our differences in the workplace, we at Out and Equal see differences as a point of incredible learning and exchange of new knowledge and ideas, rather than differences actually dividing us. But to emerge from recognizing differences, coming to a place of this is actually an opportunity, this is a space where we can bond, we actually have to be deliberate in that and do some work. Now, thankfully, in this case, I think it's a creative way to do that work, but that is the thought that's gone into this particular new toolkit. So let's also recap what this common ground does and why it matters. We're going to talk about some of these significant events, but perhaps you remember what the first unfolding of the AIDS quilt on the National Mall looked like. Perhaps you remember the times when, under the Reagan administration, the press secretary at the time openly made jokes about HIV and AIDS and the populations affected by it. Perhaps you have a very vivid memory of where you were when Ellen DeGeneres came out, or when you saw Laverne Cox standing tall and strong and proud on the cover of Time magazine. All of these have an emotional impact on us as individuals, and then they connect us as a group, as a collective, emotionally as well. Now, what could have happened to me on that call with my colleagues was I could have actually, if I didn't check myself and I didn't reflect, I could have gone to a place of bias, of unconscious bias, where perhaps I felt a certain kinship with the handful of colleagues that had that deep experience as I did around the signing of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I don't mean the repeal. I mean when Clinton signed it. The murder of Matthew Shepard, some of these other events that I've talked about, I could have developed an unconscious bias pulling me towards people and making me think more favorably of them. And the shadow of that being that I would have felt more distance from those colleagues who didn't share those experiences. And lo and behold, most of those colleagues were younger than me. And we see this play out in the workplace. We see sometimes, whether it's, jokes that are actually pretty insensitive and not very funny, sort of the thanks boomer school of joking, or perhaps somebody who is further along in their career and age-wise dismissively says to a younger colleague, oh, I bet you don't even remember that, or I bet you were in diapers when that happened. these can all become actual friction points, and they get in the way of not just understanding each other, they get in the way of the efficacy of one of the most potent tools in our toolbox for change. They get in the way of the efficacy of employee resource groups. That is, if we don't examine them and we don't turn these differences in our emotional connection to our own history into an asset. And so with that, we're weeks away from Pride Month. And rather than have what we might lovingly think of as sort of the same old heroes, the same old posters of whether it's Harvey Milk or, Ellen DeGeneres or Melissa Etheridge, think about those through a generational lens, through the lens of race, through the lens of class, through the lens of ability. And so rather than, march towards Pride Month without really reflecting on this concept of pride and history, we wanted to offer you this exercise that we were able to do at our executive forum in March in San Francisco, our first in-person event post-COVID. And we wanted this to be instructive and actually a toolbox that you can use within your own employee resource groups. And I will, as I pass the baton back to Rebecca, I will tell you, I was absolutely bowled over with dozens of people in the room at Expo, the tears that emerged, whether it was somebody looking at how many people in the room remembered or even felt affected by the first time the quote gay cancer was detected back in 1981, or someone lamenting that we're losing our history, and an opportunity for people in the room to really exchange ideas about the significance of what we consider our shared history and our path forward. So again, thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to get to the heart of this. And there's perhaps no one better than to leverage technology and get us going than my wonderful colleague, Rebecca York. Rebecca?
Thank you so much, Dina. And to kick us off, we are going to move us over to Mentimeter. You all are, I think if you've been on any Out and Equal calls in the last year plus, are probably very familiar with this platform, but it's going to allow us to run through this entire activity that otherwise would be us moving around a room all together in person in a virtual setting. Now, this is not the only virtual platform that you can run this session on. There is more information on other platforms you can use in the resource itself, the link to which is in the chat. But please do go in right now, log into Mentimeter, and we'll get us started here. I'm also going to throw that information into the chat for you so you can't miss it. If you're a tech-savvy person, you can scan that QR code. If not, just open a new tab in your browser, enter in the code you see on the screen. Something really important to note is that Mentimeter is completely anonymous. So you should feel 100% comfortable to answer all of our kind of prompts coming up with as much authenticity, honesty as you feel able to. And again, we have instructions on how you can really deepen this conversation on your end in that resource. So it looks like we've got a lot of folks logging in. And again, that information is in the chat. So I'm going to move us forward and explain the activity. So as Dina mentioned, we're going to be looking at LGBTQ historical events. Now, for those of you outside of the US, you will notice these are all US based. Apologies about that. It is just the nature of the activity. It works best if you have some constraints on it. Otherwise, it gets a little unruly. So we are going to be looking at primarily US-based events, and we are going to be asking you to rank them based on your own personal relationships to them. You'll notice that we're going to have two different slide types, essentially. There's going to be a ranking system and a multiple choice system. This is to help you see how you can leverage this in your own spaces and your own teams. It's really just to make sure you see the kind of full diversity of options here. So we've got 3 options to choose from. Ranking number 1 is going to be, you know what, this event, I don't have any knowledge or personal connection to it. I'm brand new to this, really excited to learn, but I've got nothing. Then we've got option 2, which is I have an emotional connection to this event, even if it didn't directly impact me. This is basically what I would say about Matthew Shepard. I didn't live it. It had a profound impact on me still. You know, so any event that you weren't personally impacted by, but that you have that emotional connection to, that deep kind of knowledge of. Then our third option is, this is a very personal event and I lived it or was profoundly impacted by it in some way. So this would be, for those of you, to keep the Matthew Shepard example, who lived through Matthew Shepard's murder, who were deeply invested in the news following it and all of the press around it, and seeing the Shepard, the Shepards, the parents, starting their activism career around advocating for LGBTQ folks post Matthew's murder. So really looking at these three different experiences across the spread here. I knew nothing, I knew about it and it mattered to me, but I didn't live it, or I lived it, this really matters to me. We're gonna get us started here and we can go through it again. If folks have questions, send it into the chat and I'm happy to answer. But to kick us off, I'd like for you all again to rate your personal experience and connection with these following events. So we've got Frank Kameny in 1957. Kameny was dismissed from the US Army's MAP service for being homosexual. We've got the Compton cafeteria riots, which was along the same vein as the Stonewall riots. Happened in the Tenderloin district in San Francisco, if I'm remembering correctly. And again, was led by trans women of color. There were riots across the country around that time. And then, of course, the Stonewall riots, where we all know Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, these kind of movement figureheads as we see them now, were leaders in that space. So it sounds like a lot of us don't really know about Frank Kameny. We're all in that kind of one stage. Like, I'm really excited to learn about this. I have no relation to this event. Some of us know about the Compton cafeteria riots. It sounds like we've got a few folks in that two space, but a lot of us are still in the ones. We're still not really having any kind of connection or kind of impact associated with this event. And then, of course, the Stonewall riots, which I think we are really much more familiar with based on the kind of last 5 years, the kind of consciousness raising around it. We are much more familiar with. We weren't living it necessarily, but we were still impacted by it. So you're getting a sense for how this activity can play out. And if we were in person, there would be big sheets of paper on the walls. There'd be sticky notes used to mark your relationship. So there's a lot of different ways that you can be visualizing folks' responses here. I'm going to move us along, though, to our next one. And now we've got three new events. We've got Donna Burkett and Minonia Evans, who made national news when a federal judge denied their application for a marriage license, and that was in 1971. Looks like most of us do not know about Burkett and Evans. That's completely okay. Then we've got more folks who were impacted by or aware of the kind of time in which homosexuality was removed from the DSM in 1973. But again, not a ton of familiarity there, not a ton of folks saying, you know what, this really directly impacted me at that moment. Although we are seeing a slightly more even spread there. And then we've got a little bit less recognition of Anita Bryant, who founded the Save Our Children organization in 1977. Bryant was based out of Florida, and Dina, refresh my memory here, but I'm pretty sure that she was protesting LGBT gay marriage at the time, or
yeah, and she was an orange juice, famed for orange juice, and actually she had a pie thrown in her face quite famously. I do think part of the inclusion of Anita Bryant that does feel like a bit of tragic poetry right now is that here we are, you know, almost 4 decades later, in the same state of Florida, which feels right now like ground zero for those who oppose equality, targeting, you know, LGBTQ young people and discussions of LGBTQ identity in young people. Thank you. I'm seeing in the chat box, it looks like plenty of people did live through this. So she wanted to remove gay teachers. Yes, exactly. She had her focal point was really on youth and education.
Thank you for that. And yeah, I love the quotes that we're getting in from folks. And Isabel, thank you for sending in that NBC link as well. So for those of you who are at that kind of one for that event, let's go read up on it after this. Okay, so our next event for you, and we're seeing a different slide type so you can see the ways that this activity can change. But what is your relationship to that famous New York Times headline, Rare Cancer Seen in 41 Homosexuals? And you'll notice that when you use this sort of multiple choice format, you're really seeing more of the kind of inside look into folks' answers here. So we're seeing that 45 folks did not have any significant or personal connection to the event. 39 folks are saying that this profoundly impacted me, but I didn't personally experience it. And 9 are saying that I lived through this event and it holds great personal significance. So thank you all for your willingness to send in your answers, especially for this kind of slide type where your answers are a little bit more exposed. We greatly appreciate it. I'm seeing that folks in the chat are saying that some of you collected newspaper clippings throughout the 80s on the AIDS crisis. And oh, I wish you'd saved them too. That would be such an amazing archive to have at this point. Okay. How about your memory or your experience around the first AIDS quilt? Oh, and we've got folks immediately saying, yes, I lived through this event. It holds great personal significance. We've got more saying this event profoundly impacted me, but I didn't personally experience it. And that is in the lead right now. Yeah, we've got folks in the chat saying, I was young, but the AIDS crisis definitely affected my entire youth. Yeah. We lost many friends in the AIDS epidemic. We're tearing up just thinking about the quilt. We lost 2 cousins, lived it, never forget reading the names at the quilt. We instantly remember folks. Yeah. And then we've got 29 people in the audience saying, I do not have any significant or personal connection to this event. We were in junior high and lost our uncle to AIDS. I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, if you feel comfortable, share what these events are bringing up for you in this space. Share what these answers are bringing up for you in this space. I am going to move us along. What about these ones? Don't Ask, Don't Tell being signed into law in 1993. Ellen coming out in 97. Oh, we all know that one. Or a lot of us know that one. Look at that. And then, of course, Matthew Shepard's murder in 1998. So now we're getting into this kind of stage in our history that it sounds like we are much more familiar with. Yeah. Ellen's coming out, of course, made headlines. It's still referenced to this day in pop culture. And of course, Don't Ask, Don't Tell and Matthew Shepard are cornerstones in our history. And thank you to you all who are still sharing about the AIDS quilt. We've got folks saying that they were on active duty during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Powerfully changed folks' experiences in the military. Yeah. Military family, the backlash to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It's horrific in my family. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. think about your answer in relation to other people's as it's showing up on screen. With no judgment, just taking a minute to take some stock. Looking at that. I'm going to move us along now if we're ready. What about these ones? Again, you're seeing we're moving up in our history again. Prop 8 being passed in 2008. Oh, we know these. Those were very quick responses. And of course, we've got Obergefell v. Hodges, 2015. And we've got Pulse in 2016. Now, this is really interesting, and this is what we saw in person as well, that Pulse was the only event that every single person said, we lived this and it profoundly impacted us. And when we were doing this in person, if you've looked at our resource yet, you'll notice we're doing it with colored sticky notes. It was the only sheet that was pretty much entirely one color. And that seems to be a similar trend here. Of course, we do have a pretty high familiarity with Prop 8 and Obergefell. Okay. So again, look at where your answers are in relation to other people's. Oh, we've got some wonderful comments coming in. I saw the words oral history and immediately perked up here. Oral history is of such deep significance. Our age-segregated spaces throughout school years and even in workplace settings make it challenging to interact with individuals who lived it. We're deeply touched by it, and that electricity carries to others in the room. We need more spaces for sharing our multi-generational LGBTQ experiences. You are spot on, Christine. You're really hitting the nail on the head here. I'm so glad that you also feel that way. Okay. So this was just a sampling, right? This was just what you can do with this activity. I mean, even in a virtual setting, even just running through a handful of events in a webinar, to top it all off, we had some amazing dialogue going on. We had some folks really deeply connecting to what was being shared, learning new things throughout the session. So what came up for you in a word, in a phrase? This was humbling, exciting, illuminating. We're feeling sympathetic, emotional. Some of us are feeling young. That's totally okay. Some of us are feeling safe, sad. So recognizing that we have some things to learn still. Maybe we're missing some information. We've got limited knowledge. This is heartbreaking for some folks, interesting for others. We're feeling reflective, vulnerable, privileged, fortunate, resilient. Like we're survivors. We're part of something bigger. Lucky, seen, validating. Old, also okay. We're mostly feeling that emotional, sad, connected. Some of us feel like we're moving backwards, melancholy. Maybe we're bonding right now. I think we're bonding in some ways. We're optimistic. We're resilient, challenged. For me, this has been a very profound experience, even just watching your answers come in here. I don't know, Dina, how is it making you feel right now?
I have a certain joyfulness about it because on a very deep level, I'll say spiritual level, when we hold memories as present, when we remember Pedro Zamora, somebody who was very important to me as a young person, and through actually MTV's The Real World, that's actually where a lot of Gen X and millennials started to see real LGBTQ people. so actually seeing folks that I know and folks I don't know personally in the chat box, connecting on some of these same reference points that I hadn't necessarily thought about in a while. To me, it's a form of honoring those that we've lost, honoring those that have paved a way for us. And I think when we keep that level of recognition going, they're never truly gone, that their presence is still here. So I'm choosing on this Friday to see that as a certain joyfulness, even though certainly there is also some deep sadness here as we're to revisit our histories together. Histories plural is to revisit a lot of difficult times.
Yeah. And I see some folks in the chat saying it's really nice to have LGBTQ history centered in this way, especially given the kind of current efforts to reduce its visibility. And I think, yeah, one of the aspects of this being a kind of melancholy activity of maybe feeling like we're losing our history is that just in participating in this, we're actually raising it up again, right? We're actually making sure that people will now go and Google Frank Kameny, and that we'll pass that knowledge on to our kids or our roommates when we're done with this session. So it is definitely a both and situation in my view. Okay, second question for you all. Are there any reference points that stood out to you or really especially were impactful on your life? And if so, why? I know we had a lot of folks sharing in the chat, but for those of you who didn't get to, or for those of you who want to share more, this is your space to do so.
Yeah. Rosie O'Donnell talking about her love of Tom Cruise. I was so confused. I like that.
Yeah. And already we're seeing new events, right? And you'll notice that on our resource, we've got so many more events listed. And even in the drafting process, we came up with like a list of double the size. And the Rent musical was on it. All of these things that you're naming really came into play here. Repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, same-sex marriage being passed. Obergefell, I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime. Will and Grace, yeah, yes. Yeah. I think of music during that time. Ani DeFranco, Indigo Girls, Melissa Etheridge. Okay, marriage rights. Apparently I'm very uninformed on LGBTQ events. That's okay. Here's the thing. Again, we're just in the space of learning. Some of us have no connection to when Will and Grace aired, and myself being one of them, but I'm learning about the impact that it had, right? And of course, I've watched some reruns and it's hilarious, but you know, we're all in this learning space and very much really hoping that this starts a kind of exchange across generation, cross community. The Pulse shooting when our safe space was targeted, yeah. But for some of us, it empowered us to step up and push allyship trainings at our companies, which is great. For all the bad things associated with our history, it's really a testament to how far we've come and how far we're going to continue to go, that we didn't just survive all the bad, we continue to thrive. Yeah, it's a wonderful sentiment. We've got a lot more folks sharing their own experiences in the chat as well, so go take a look there. Hearing the word bisexual for the first time on TV and knowing that was me. Anita Bryant is showing up a few times. How Sesame Street has evolved, yeah, over the last 5-10 years, really, we've seen this kind of shift in how they're approaching gender identity, sexual orientation, having those conversations with young people. AIDS Quilt, so much love and power. ACT UP and early activists, yes, yeah. Recent leak of Roe v. Wade. The chance that I can marry someone I love. Madonna pushing boundaries. Yeah. Ellen coming out. I watched that show with my family. It helped start my coming out. Friends, Will and Grace, music, Adam Lambert, Adam Rippon. Queer as Folk, Title 7, Tegan and Sarah, yep. Mr. Rogers saying it's okay to be who you are. First Kiss on Dawson's Creek, Willow coming out on Buffy. I Can't Think Straight and Saving Face, yes, great movie if you haven't seen it. Crying Game, also Rent, Billie Jean, yeah. The L Word, Prep on the Market, yes, 100%. Boys Don't Cry, Chaz Bono, March on Washington in the 90s, the Catholic Church generally, or maybe specifically any specific events there. We've got Pose, we've got the L Word, 9/11, yeah. Okay. L Word showing up a few more times, but I'm a cheerleader. Kissing Jessica Stein, Calzona on Grays. Yes. And if whoever sent in Calzona, if you feel comfortable sharing with the class in the chat what that kind of hyphenate name means. But I'm a cheerleader, Caitlyn Jenner. Yeah, this is amazing. And already, again, more cultural reference points, right? And some of these, I'm sure you were going, I have no idea what that was. And for some of you, I'm sure you're like, oh yeah, that one, I totally relate to that. We've got BP in the chat saying Arizona and Cali is what Calzona stands for. Yep. That was Grey's Anatomy. So again, really a way to build this, this connection, right? With the people in the space in a way that we don't often get the chance to. And it gives us a few laughs along the way. So where do you see these or other LGBTQ plus cultural reference points showing up in your work or programming? And if you don't see these, why might that be? Okay, ERG meetings and events, yeah. Our ERG has a newsletter with history and pop culture sections. Not much in the government consulting space. Pronouns in our emails, event planning, DEI trainings. Diversity conversations in all caps. I think they can come up in casual conversation as well. Yeah, definitely. Reverse mentorship. The fact that I live in a state that does not allow firing based on orientation. Are any of these standing out to you, Dina, as you're looking through these answers?
Well, yeah, I think what is actually standing out to me is this combination of sort of social moments. Like I love that somebody said water cooler conversations, or I guess in these times that can be a water cooler. It can be the pre-meeting Zoom chit chat, one-on-one conversations, sort of those social interpersonal moments. But then there are also these structural places where these references show up. So for example, the programming of the employee resource group, mentorship and reverse mentorship programs. So I think that it's important to recognize that while I think, and I love that we're having fun, listing the seminal moments, whether from television or music or politics, this really has a currency in how we forge social connections at work, mentoring relationships at work, sort of team cohesion. And it also plays a role in how we are charting a path as an employee resource group or as a DEI group. If the year is 2022 and the conversation is dominated by people who are almost all sort of shaped by the same events that happened 20 years ago, well, you could potentially be at risk of you know, at its most extreme, sort of still fighting those battles of 20 years ago at the exclusion of some of the more current needs that the full diversity of our community needs. And so we do see this playing out. And that's why this level of reflection, I think, can be really so beneficial to opening our eyes. You know, if you saw something, then in context, you realized, you know, I think that reference point was something in the last year or two, and it's not familiar to me. Well, this is a great space to then take a quick note. You know, we'll circulate this, this session and look that up and understand, maybe from a colleague from a different generation, why this has so much significance to them.
Yeah, and we've got some amazing answers coming in here about how we're seeing these cultural reference points showing up or not in our workplaces. Yeah. Huh. We've got a lot of folks saying pronouns and email signatures, ERG programming, of course. And then things like the importance of allowing those who do not identify in the gender norm to address topics as they choose and not forcing the conversation for the sake of how your company looks. Health benefits programming being more inclusive of LGBTQ needs, company flying the pride flag. Yeah. Yeah. Part of an equal opportunity board for a local township, passing of laws that protect LGBTQ employment and housing. Company sponsoring pride events. The shift from strict gendered dress codes to dress for your day code. Safe zone trainings and stickers, yeah. Company asking us if we can fly the progress pride flag instead of the previous one, yeah. Gender neutral bathrooms and lactation rooms, Wonderful. Thank you all so much for participating in that. If you were still typing while I flipped us ahead, no worries, you should still be able to submit. As Dina mentioned before, this resource that we're launching, this session we just walked you all through, is a part of our Next Gen initiative that's powered by our partners at Bank of America. So this is going to be one of what is soon to be many resources talking about this kind of either closing this kind of generational gap, bringing Gen Z folks into the workplace, attracting and retaining Gen Z talent, and what that means for your talent acquisitions folks, your HR folks, your managers, all of these things that come up, right? So just a little plug there to keep an eye out for what comes next. And I want to turn us over to Q&A so we have some time before we wrap up. But before I do, please send in your feedback for this session. It really helps us improve our content. And of course, this session in particular, we are still working on honing this format. So anything that you can send in is helpful here. And I've sent a link in the chat as well. So please go grab it there if you don't get it here. And without further ado, I'm going to move us on to our Q&A. Please feel free, send in your questions on Mentimeter in the chat.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. And thanks to all of you putting in the kind words in the chat box. We're so glad that even in a virtual space, this is having an impact. Worth noting that, as you saw, this does not have to be a high-tech endeavor for your employee resource group. It can certainly serve as a fun team building activity. It can serve as a pride activity. And I think you will find that you really learn a lot from each other when you do this. This works for small groups, and it also works for much larger groups. And so we, in this toolkit, we wanted to help ensure diversity of people and events. This is not the most exhaustive LGBTQ history timeline that exists. So we recognize that, and I think we'll keep adding and elevating different moments, and encourage all of you to as well. And maybe even add some that are unique to your company. For example, some of you may have been there when the ERG at your company just began, and others that you're working with might even take for granted that it's always been there. So feel free to take this toolkit and add in content that's unique to your firm, your company. And again, with the recognition that when we have this level of self-awareness and sort of group awareness about what touches a nerve or what inspired us, or when we're having a hard day, who's our LGBTQ hero that we think about, these types of exercises really do bridge that level of connection across generations, across geographies, and more. Also worth noting something that Rebecca said at the top of the hour, which is the first iteration of this toolkit has been decidedly US focused. I love the diversity of folks who joined today. Please do riff on this concept and build in references that make the most sense to you. And then our regional impact program leads like CV Viverito and Karina Hendren will build this out for our different regions as well. So I think, Rebecca, shall we just alternate these questions? I think this is more of a logistics question in terms of how Mentimeter works, but I thought I saw something about legislation pop up right before.
Yeah, you want to take that one?
What are some suggested ways that we can find strength in mental health during such a time as this while facing so many anti-LGBTQ points of legislation? Well, first and foremost, everyone's mental health is individual to them. And so however your resources show up for you, maybe there's an employee assistance program at your firm. You may have other mental health resources in your life. I certainly wouldn't tell anybody precisely how to do that at that individual level. What I also read in the question is that, as we talked about, we are in a moment of incredible distress as a community. And I would say broadly that as much as we are advocates, it's also okay and healthy and necessary to carve out the space to feel angry, to feel sad, to even feel despair when we see yet another anti-LGBTQ bill, or when we saw this leaked decision for Roe v. Wade. We have to experience that full range of reactions so that hopefully we can get to a place of individual empowerment and group empowerment. What I would also say is to really give voice within, as long as it's safe for you, but give voice within your employee resource group. If you have colleagues who are allies, allies play an extraordinary role in moments like this, because these are the folks who you can say, I'm having a hard time focusing on this because every time my phone pings, it's CNN or the Washington Post with yet another news story about what DeSantis is doing in Florida. So I would say to give voice to this. And perhaps one of my colleagues can put in the chat box, we have another toolkit called Your Story, Your Truth, Your Power. And so if you find that in these moments, it is helpful to you to tell your story, this resource can actually provide some different organization to how your story may show up in the workplace, whether it's directly to affect change, whether it's just to, frankly, unburden yourself from the sense of isolation that you're the only person feeling this so deeply. Those are some of the things that come to mind for me. I know colleagues like Rebecca and others maybe in the chat box, you're all welcome as well to give any tips to a peer who thank you for asking this question.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And I think we should move on to our next one, which is logistics-based, as you said. If we want to have our group walk through the Mentimeter tool, should we just use that same access code, or will we have access to that in any way? So you will need a new code, which you will get through creating your own account in Mentimeter. This is a one-time test activity, if you will, that we've just walked you through. So you'll need to create your own account, add in the reference points that you think will be particularly impactful. We can, however, share this kind of modeled our Mentimeter slides as a template for you, so that when you go through that creation process, you won't be doing it completely from ground zero. There are also other pieces of technology that you can leverage, things like Miro, which I believe is a kind of virtual whiteboard. I know Zoom just updated its whiteboard settings as well that folks have been saying we should leverage for this in the future. And yes, tons of opportunity around intersectionality. So, did that one. Okay. It looks like those were all of our questions that we've gotten in. If anyone else has more, please feel free to send them through.
Thank you all so much for the excitement, for spending part of your Friday with us. I think I've got my Friday evening dinner conversation ready to go. I want to ask people what I plan on hanging out with some LGBTQ people, maybe even my own wife, but I plan on asking people what those seminal moments have been in their lives, and excited to hear the answers. Every time we do this, every time we ask this question, we each learn something. So again, thank you all. And as Rebecca said, please do let us know your feedback. We are still refining this, again, to really bring it to scale. So would love to hear how you apply this internally, certainly to our global, wonderful global network that joined. We'll continue to build this out to make it really speak to everyone's local context.
Well, thank you so much, Dina, and thank you all for being here with us today for this activity. Again, please send in your feedback, but we greatly appreciate it. Have a good rest of your days.
Excellent. Thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend.